movement. Skeletal muscle moves the skeleton. Smooth muscle moves whatever is found within the hollow organ it's contained within. And cardiac muscle moves the blood within our heart and the arterial portion of our circulation. As we take a look at muscle types, and we take a look first at our skeletal muscle, obviously we should know where we find skeletal muscle. You don't need to be able to name any of the muscles yet, but everybody here has at least heard of one muscle, right? If I said name a muscle, everybody here can name me one muscle of the body, right? Biceps, triceps, pecs, abs, right? But obviously we find skeletal muscle within our skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle provides us with voluntary movement, i.e. movement that we can actually dictate. I can tell my bicep to contract and it'll do what I want it to do, right? It's also involuntary in that we can shiver and shake. Everybody here has done something out of nowhere. They kind of like do like a little spasmic shake. That's your brain doing it for you. Again, located in the skeletal muscles that attach to our bones and joints. And when you're looking at skeletal muscle under the microscope, what you're going to see, and again, for some reason they didn't put them out yet, but I'll find them for you, is you're going to see these long cylindrical cigar-shaped structures called muscle fibers. And these muscle fibers are going to appear to be ribbed, right? You almost see like this pink and white type pattern. We call this striations. And then what you're going to see in between each of these cigar-shaped structures are a series of nuclei, because this muscle is multinucleated, meaning every cell has more than one nucleus. And unlike the next tissue we're going to show you, which is cardiac muscle, this muscle appears very, very organized. When you see it under the microscope, it almost looks like it's very, very organized, as opposed to cardiac muscle, which has some similarities but some significant dissimilarities. This is cardiac muscle. All right, cardiac muscle is also striated. It also comes in what appears to be cylindrical forms. It's also multinucleated. But unlike skeletal muscle, which is nice and organized and very, easy to kind of dissect in your head, cardiac muscle is a little more hodgepodge, and the reason for that is the shape of the cells. The cells aren't just these long cylindrical cells. They kind of have little forked ends. And so as a result, you're going to see this as kind of having more of a hodgepodge pattern. The other thing that's really important to differentiate between skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle is in cardiac muscle, you're going to see these dark black lines, which is very, very unique to cardiac muscle, and these are called intercalated discs. Intercalated discs are these little discs that separate one cardiac muscle cell from its neighbor. It's kind of like a bookend, if you will, to each of the cells of the cardiac tissue. And what's important about the intercalated discs is this allows for each of these muscle cells, Gesundheit, to communicate with one another so that they can coordinate their contractions more readily. And again, it helps this heart to contract in unison, as skeletal muscle doesn't need to do. I can contract parts of my skeletal muscle and have no problem. I can contract all of my skeletal muscle, no problem. I don't need to, but when we talk about the heart, all the muscles contract at the same time. The intercalated discs help that to occur. The last of our muscle fibers is this muscle fiber. This is our smooth muscle. And smooth muscle, where do we find smooth muscle? Stomach's a variety. The easiest answer is hollow organs. If it's an organ that's hollow, stomach being a good example, smooth muscle is the muscle. So blood vessels, everything digestive system, all of our respiratory system, anything that has a muscle and it's a hollow organ, smooth muscle is your muscle. The only exception to that rule would be the heart. The heart is hollow, and it doesn't have smooth muscle. It has cardiac muscle. So mostly in the walls of our hollow organs. smooth muscle is a series of small spindle-like cells that are all linked to one another, but these spindle-like cells have a very unique shape. That little spindle where they're tapered on the end. And so what we're able to do with these cells is as we pack them to one another, we can actually create a circular pattern, which creates a hollow organ. And as these muscles contract, they compress whatever contents are located within that hollow organ. And they give this sort of an appearance under the microscope. Now, in my messed up head, which I'll admit, I've got my own way of looking at things, and you guys are going to have your own ways of looking at things. I always see this as a stream where you have like the shadows of fish just underneath the stream. And almost, to me, this tissue looks like it's a flowing tissue. It almost looks like a tissue that's in motion. And when you see it under the microscope, I always see it the same way. So that's what, and to me, that's what makes this tissue so unique. It almost looks like it's flowing, in this particular case, to the top left-hand corner of the square. But again, that's my ADD/dyslexic brain at work. Everybody cool with these three tissues? Which leaves us with one last tissue, and that's nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is a very unique tissue. When we're thinking about nervous tissue, now we're talking, of course, about the brain and the spinal cord and any nerve of the body. And the quintessential nervous tissue is a neuron. All right? And the neuron has a general shape that looks like so. We're seeing a neuron in all of its glory in this particular picture. Everything here in yellow. And while neurons come in a couple different shapes, this is the general accepted shape for the standard neuron. And it has with it all the key components. Little projections here called dendrites, the cell body, otherwise known as the soma, which is where the nucleus and all the organelles exist. And then a tail-like structure, which is called an axon, which ultimately leads to the end of the neuron, which are called the end bulbs. Under the microscope, this tissue is going to look something like so. Where what you are seeing is the cell body, a series of cell bodies, and all these black lines represent the axons of that neuron. And then what you're seeing in the background, this yellowish, these are going to be other supporting cells known as neuroglia. Now, under our microscope, I don't think they're brown. I think instead the cell body's purple. So what you're looking for is just a big square of purple. And what you're seeing is a series of neurons all compact together in whatever tissue of the nervous system that they've chosen for their slide. Everybody kosher with that? Man.
They look like deflated balloons.
Yes, they do. Especially the one on the top. Almost like a balloon that's deflating and you got the little, I'm with you. And here's the thing, under the microscope's picture doesn't look that dissimilar to this. Again, the big difference is the staining. This one is stained in more of a brownish reddish, where the one under the microscope, it's more of a purple. But when you see it, you're like, it looks so much unlike anything else. This is a pretty easy one to see under the microscope. And again, if they ask you the location of a neuron, brain, spinal cord, nerves, one of those is definitely the correct answer. So, we have two choices at this point. I can get the microscopes out and find these four tissues for you and then have you look around, or we can move on, label the skin model. While you're labeling the skin, I'll throw the microscopes up for you, which I think makes more sense.
Yeah.
So let's move to the skin so we can do our skin models. Then you'll be able to label the skin while you're labeling the skin models, which will take you maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I'll be able to throw the microscopes of these four tissues up for you, and all will be right with the world. I'm now going into the integument.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about the lab for the skin, what we're ultimately going to do is we are going to take what we learned today in lecture, specifically the epidermis and the dermis and its layers, and we're going to transfer them over to our model. The questions on the lab exam that they ask from this model fall into a couple different categories. One, the functions of the skin. They will ask flat out functions of the skin. The main function of the skin is what? It's protection. Other functions of the skin are what? Why else do we have skin? We get rid of metabolic waste. That's one. We talked a whole lot about deodorant. What's deodorant ultimately protecting us from? Right? We perspire to control body temperature, things like that, right? And then the last one is vitamin D. Can we identify the key parts of the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis? The hypodermis, you just need to be able to label the hypodermis. With regards to the epidermis, you are going to be responsible for each of the 5 layers of the epidermis, which I'll show you, they're all on the model. And then the dermis, all the different components of the dermis, you're responsible for being able to label those as well. And then the skin, locate each skin gland and know their function, which is, again, part of the dermis stuff. So, as we take a look at this picture and this model are actually the exact same thing in more ways than one. So first and foremost, as you're looking at your model, everything from this orange line up is the epidermis. Everything from this orange line to my pinky is the dermis. And then this bottom layer, which is just this yellow layer of fat, that's the hypodermis. So they do ask the question, is this making sure you know this is the epidermis, this is the dermis, and this is the hypodermis. That question can come. They especially love to ask the hypodermis. What they'll do is they'll put a long piece of tape across the hypodermis with the number for the question, and the question is name this layer. They love to ask the hypodermis. They do it 2 out of 3 exams. When you are looking at the epidermis, all right, again, this is where your little mnemonic is going to help out. Whatever your mnemonic you use is. All right, cute Latino guy, sexy butt, that's mine. You can pick, if someone said something that another teacher taught them, which I've already forgotten, but God bless you if that's the one you like. So have a mnemonic. And here's the other thing. When I give you your answer sheet the day of the exam, if you take that answer sheet, immediately flip it over and write on the back of it stuff that you keeping stuff in your head, more power to you. To me, that's not cheating, that's effective test taking. All right, it's one thing if you put it on your hand before you come to class. It's another thing if when I give you the answer sheet, you put it like from your head to the answer sheet. That's not cheating, that's effective test taking. I know for a fact that one thing I would do if I was taking your test is I would immediately flip the page over and I would write cute Latino guy, sexy butt. Just to remind myself of the order of the layers in the skin. That would be one of the things I know I would put on my test paper. That way when the question gets asked, which it will, flip it over like, well, that's the 3rd layer, so it's cute Latino, that's the guy layer. All right, so that's obviously granulosum. And then boom, you're ready to rumble, right? For what it's worth. So as you look at the epidermis has its own layers, each of which has a lowercase letter, A, B, C, D, and E. And if you look in your models, you'll be able to see them nice and easy. Layer A, which is this outermost layer that's protruding up in this little mesa of sorts. This is the outermost layer of our epidermis, which is the stratum what? Corneum, stratum corneum. So lowercase a, stratum corneum. Lowercase b, which is this whitish, kind of bluish layer. This would be the 2nd layer of the skin, which would be the stratum what? Lucidum. That's the stratum lucidum. And if you look down on the bottom of your model, it says palm or sole. So it's telling you the part of the body where this skin is found. That lucidum layer is only found on the palm and the sole. If you come over here to the armpit and over here to the scalp, you'll see that that layer doesn't exist over here, right? Because this is thin skin, and we don't have all 4 layers on the thin, we only have 4 layers on the thin skin, correct? So you're only gonna find that lucidum layer over here on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. The next layer, which is this the orangish layer, which is layer lowercase c. So we have cute Latino guy. What's guy gonna be? Granulosum. So that's the granulosum layer. The next layer, which is lowercase d, what layer is this gonna be? Spinosum, right? Sexy. And then last but not least is this bottommost layer, this dark orange layer, that's lowercase e. What layer is that going to be? Butt, right, or basal. Please don't put butt on my test. Right? Unless you put it after basal. Then I'll giggle. Just knowing that you have to mnemonic that. Fair enough, so we got the 5 layers of the epidermis, all on this model, lowercase a, b, c, d, and e. They always ask one of the layers of the epidermis. I cannot remember a time when they did not ask a layer of the epidermis. The way they usually do it is they put the piece of tape over here. So they'll put it over here where they can easily put it on the top of one of those layers, and it makes it easier. And then what I'll do on a piece of tape below the question is I'll put the lowercase letter that it associates with, to make sure that if you miss the question, it's because you don't know it, not because you misunderstood what they were looking for.
Is the test full of blank or is it
Fill the blank.
all of it?
All of it. Yes, you will not have one multiple choice question. You have one true false. There's no word bank. You either know it or you don't know it, which is what makes the lab exam so damn tough. Study, because the first test is not that hard. But most people who fail, they fail the first one. And it's just because you don't study enough. You study enough to be able to do well on a multiple choice test, but you don't do well enough to do well on a fill in the blank test. And I will give you on Tuesday, I will give you a 10-question sample of what the test will look like. I'll give you a sample of what it will look like. Everybody good with the epidermis? All right, so let's move down to the dermis itself. In the dermis, there's a handful of structures that you need to be able to label out for me and know their function. First and foremost, at the end of my index finger and at the end of my, well, here's the best example. At the end of my index finger right here is a gland. This gland is attached to the hair follicle. Everybody see what I'm pointing to? That is a sebaceous oil gland. That's the gland that I told you secretes oil, known as sebum. And that oil does a few things. It nourishes the hair, preventing split ends and things of that nature. But it also puts that sebum on the surface of our skin, which nourishes our skin and prevents bacteria from being able to proliferate on our skin. It kills bacteria. So that's what this gland is here. It's an oil gland. Sebaceous oil gland. Everybody good there? The other gland that we have are the sweat glands. You see one here, and you see one here. The difference between these two sweat glands is not what they look like, it's where they're located. This sweat gland is located on the palms of our hands and the soles of our feet, where this sweat gland is located on our axilla in the underarm, and this sweat gland is located on our scalp. So these two sweat glands are the exact same sweat gland. Right? Are they eccrine or apocrine? Those are eccrine sweat glands. So these two are eccrine sweat glands. And you know that because of where they're located. And they will never cover up the location. You will always be able to see the base of this model. It would be unfair if they didn't do that. So if they point to one of the sweat glands, that's either in the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet, or on your scalp, that's an eccrine sweat gland. And the job of the eccrine sweat gland is what? It helps us to cool us down. The sweat from this will help with body temperature. Juxtapose that to this sweat gland here, which is located in our underarm. This is going to be our apocrine sweat gland. Now here's the thing, if you get to the test and they point to one of these sweat glands, and you for the life of you cannot think of whether it's apocrine or eccrine, what should you do? You have two choices. You can guess, right, in which case you got a 50-50 shot, or you can just put sweat gland. If you put sweat gland, I'll give you 1 point. If you put apocrine and it's eccrine, you get 0 points. If you put eccrine and it's apocrine, you get 0 points. So if you really don't know which one it is, put sweat gland and I'll likely give you a point. But the key here is remember, eccrine are the ones for temperature regulation. We find those in the scalp and in the palms of our hands. Apocrine is the one that we find in our underarm. This is releasing metabolic waste. Everybody with me? The other structures that we find in here is everything with the hair. The hair, we were just about to get to hair in our lecture. The hair has 3 components that I hold you responsible for. The first component is what we see here. We also see it here in orange. This is the bulb of the hair. So this is the hair bulb. You can also call it the hair follicle. The second section of the hair is the part of the hair that's not in that little bulb, but it's also not protruding from the skin. This is called the root of the hair. So we have the hair root here. And then last but not least is the hair that is exposed outside of our skin. This is called the shaft. So when you touch your hair, you're really touching hair shafts. Everybody kosher with the hair. Do not worry about the layers inside the bulb. Right? I never go that deep. Attached to the hair in red is a muscle. This muscle is called the erector pili muscle. A-R-R-E-C-T-O-R, erector pili muscle. What do you think this muscle does? It does 2 things. It gives you goosebumps. It actually changes the skin surface by making it kind of pucker, and it gives us little dimples, which we call goosebumps. But what else does it do? I'll give you a good story. I used to own a really stupid dog. No, really, dumb as a doornail. Right? Walter. Walter was a 2.5-pound Chihuahua. I will never buy a Chihuahua again after dealing with this dumb dog. My Chihuahua hated the garbage men. And the garbage men in my property, they come up the driveway right past the side of my house, which is all windows. And this stupid dog would start barking like a son of a gun, thinking this was going to scare these big burly men coming to pick up my garbage, right? And he would jump onto the windowsill, and what would happen to the hair of my 2.5-pound Chihuahua from here to the tip of its tail? It would stand on end like a giant mohawk, making an already dumb-looking dog look even dumber. It was like Mr. T miniature version, right? Because he was an all-black fur dog, right? Why was his hair standing on end? What's the function of that hair standing on end? There is a function. What does it make my Chihuahua look? It makes him look bigger, right? So now instead of looking like a 2.5-pound dumb ball of fur, he looks like a 3.5-pound ball of fur. He's going to scare that man out. Well, we do the same thing. The difference is we don't use it to look bigger because we're top of the food chain. Right? We are the top of the food chain. We're the predator, not the prey. So as a result, when we have our hair, but our hair will stand on end too. And it's happened to all of you. And what is the general function of our hair standing on end? There's a reason why it happens. When does it happen? When you're scared, right? When you get nervous or something happens where you're a little nervous. It's our body's way of telling us something is up. We don't know what it is. It might be much ado about nothing. Like, I'm deathly afraid of clowns. I hate clowns. I hate the thought of clowns. I hate the look of clowns. I won't go to the circus. Clowns drive me bonkers. Right? So the minute I see a clown, the hair on the back of my neck and into the back of my head will literally start to tingle. And it just stands on end. It drives me crazy. Right? Is it a rational fear? Of course not. It's an irrational fear, but it's one that I have nonetheless. But it's my body's way of saying to me, something's askew, man. You better pay attention. And what helps for that to happen are these muscles. These muscles, when they contract, since they are attached to our hair follicle, they cause the hair to stand on end. Now, for some animals, like my 2.5-pound ex-Chihuahua, right, it made them look bigger and tougher. For us, it gives us an alert. It's an alert system that tells us to just, hey, look at our surroundings. We've all been a place where we got someplace where we're like, dude, how in the heck did I get here? The next thing you know, you get a little nervous and you start to have like a little hair on end. That's your erector pili muscle. Everybody good with that muscle?
And what'd you do with your Chihuahua?
We found a family that loves Chihuahuas and said, here you go. And they said, how much do you want for the Chihuahua? I said, really? You're doing me a favor. I should pay you. Because this is a bag of stupidity right here. We had 2 dogs, and we thought our older dog needed a friend. So we got the Chihuahua. We found out our older dog did not need a friend. She was just fine on her own. And so after about a year of wanting the Chihuahua, I'm like, all right, this is enough. And then he nipped one of my boys. And I'm like, that's it, no more. So, no more Chihuahuas. There's a reason why every time you go to an animal shelter, it's like 5,000 Chihuahuas and like 6 big dogs. They're rough dogs. All right, last but not least, on the bottom is the hypodermis. So this is our hypodermis, otherwise known as our subcutaneous layer. So what you want to make sure is everything we just talked about, you want to label on your, you want to label on your model. On the opposite side, this shows the different types of burns. And there are 4 types of burns, 3 of which are very well depicted on this model. You have a 1st degree, a 2nd degree, a 3rd degree, and a 4th degree burn. The difference between each of the burns is a combination of the number of layers that are destroyed in the skin, and with it, the severity. The greater the number, the more severe the burn. A 1st degree burn is what we see here. And in a 1st degree burn, what we do is we burn the epidermis. The single best example of burning the epidermis is a what? Sunburn, right? Everybody here has gotten sunburn, right? Where the skin just starts to fry up a little bit, it hurts, it stings, you put some aloe on it, give it a week or 2, you slough all that skin off, and everything's back to normal again, right? That's a simple 1st degree burn, not dangerous at all. The 2nd degree burn is what you see here. In a 2nd degree burn, you burn the epidermis and the dermis, right? So now you burn 2 layers of the skin. With a 2nd degree burn, you will always have the production of a what? Blister. You will always have a blister. What's happening here is as you burn not only the epidermis but the dermis, those 2 layers of the skin separate. And when they separate, they fill with fluid. And that fluid causes a little blister to form on the surface of the skin, which if you pop, the fluid will literally drain right out, right? And then what you're dealing with is just raw skin underneath. But what you're seeing underneath it is the dermis. You just peeled off the epidermis and now you just have exposed dermis, right? Good example, my son Jack, when he was about 4, he decided to touch a hot iron like this and burned all 4 of the pads of these 4 fingers. And within 30 seconds, blisters on all 4 fingers, right? Because he had burned straight through the epidermis and into the dermis. So we wrapped it and, give it a few weeks and he was back to normal. Now you never know, right? Usually no big deal, but if you see a blister, you know 2nd degree burn occurred.
I think it was like last year, I made tea, but I put it in the microwave for 2 minutes, so it was boiling hot at this point. I was walking up the stairs and it splashed over my hand, and it felt like my finger, it's this finger, like I see the scar very faintly, but the whole night my finger felt like it was on fire, and so I had to keep my finger in a cup of ice water for the whole night.
Did
And
it
then
blister?
And then I wasn't gonna pop it, so it just dried and turned into a scab, and then.
Yeah, if you can avoid popping the blister, don't pop the blister. All right, if you can avoid popping a blister, avoid it. If you have to, then the key is lots and lots of Neosporin. All right, make sure you keep that thing covered and protected, because otherwise it'll scar up. But the minute you take out the epidermis, you've now significantly increased the chance of you getting a minor skin infection. 3rd degree is what we see here. The 3rd degree burn is when we burn the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. So we burn all 3 layers. This one can kill you. All right, this is the one where if you get this, you better be on your way to the hospital. All right, because this ultimately, yes, it does give you exposure to infection, but most people don't die from 3rd degree burns. They don't die from infection. What do they die from? Pain doesn't kill you. Pain just makes you want to die. 2 very different things. Look, I bit off my tongue when I was a kid. Clean off. That hurt worse than anything I can possibly try to explain to you. It wasn't going to kill me though. There's a good backstory to it. But answer my question first and I'll answer yours. Nope. Nothing to do with infection. People with 3rd degree burns do not die typically from infection. What do they die from? Shock. They die from shock. The body goes into shock because they lose massive amounts of water in a very, very, very quick period of time. By the time they get to the hospital takes care of the infection part. Right? Don't get me wrong, if left untreated, they'll die of infection. But we have modern medicine. Modern medicine, they're going to get on IV drips, they're going to get wraps, they're going to get all the proper treatment they need to keep infection from usually being the problem. This is going to definitively cause a scar. This will cause scarring. You've seen people with 3rd degree burns, you hear about house fires and stuff like that, and they have horrible scarring. That's 3rd degree burn. The 4th degree burn, which isn't depicted on this model, but we will talk about in lecture, that's when you burn the epidermis, the dermis, the hypodermis, and the tissue underneath. So if it's connected to a muscle, the muscle gets burned. If it's connected to the bone gets burned. If it's connected to soft tissue, connective tissue, that gets burned. And those are just devastating. Right, they're like 3rd degree burns with a little bit of a steroid enhancer. No bueno. So the backstory, I was sleigh riding. I grew up in Jersey, right? And so we all did sledding. And so one day I decided my buddy and I were sledding, and we had this huge hill, and like a bunch of dummies, we created a double bump. So you hit the one jump, landed on the second, and skipped off of it. It was great. The problem is I grew up in the era of Michael Jordan. And if you were growing up in the era of Michael Jordan, what did Michael Jordan tend to do with his tongue when he played basketball? He stuck it out of his mouth. So all the kids of my generation, the 80s, we did everything sticking our tongues out because we wanted to be like Michael Jordan. He was the best, right? So I was sledding like Michael Jordan. And when I hit that second bump, I clenched my mouth and bit my tongue off.
How much? Like this much or like this much?
This one.
Did you see it on this one?
Yeah, I picked it up. On the snow. I was a 5th grader. I walked into my house and told my mom. She just turned around, I had blood like coming all down, holding a piece of my tongue in my hand. And I was that kid who hurt himself a lot. So by the time this happened, my mom turned around, she was cooking, and she just goes, all right, get in the car. My mother used to tell her friends that she had an open tab at the emergency room. And she would just tell the nurses when she took me in, just put it on my tab. And so they had to reattach it. Handful of stitches. And a lot of ice cream later, it's good. But I have a bubble in the center of my tongue because of it.
Can you like
I know exactly
move
where it is.
around and feel it?
The bubble doesn't move, but so I can tell you exactly where the locking off is because of that. Oh, yeah. The stupid things you do to yourself. But hey, look, it works. Fully functions. I can whatever ER doc, his name was Dr. D. Los Angeles. You put that bad boy right back on. There's no big deal.
Okay.
A couple of fish hook stitches later, we're golden. All right, label your models. While you're labeling your models, I'm going to put up the 3 muscles and the neuron over here. And that way you'll have everything at your disposal for the rest of class.